CSIS 1430 is filmed before a live studio audience.
Today is a whole new world. If you've been exposed to regular programming, the real world programming that's outside of HTML and CSS, you may be familiar with some of these ideas, but we're going to take CSS to a new level here today. We'll see some pretty powerful things. So, first of all, as a reminder, what are the three foundational components of HTML? Tags, attributes, and values. Very good. So, let's make a tag. Div. Let's make an attribute. Here's a new attribute you guys have not heard of yet. That is a real attribute in HTML. I'm not trolling you. That's a real attribute. I just invented it right now. You can invent your own attributes. You totally can. As long as they start with data dash, you can invent your own attributes. Now, one called data dash beavis is probably not that useful, but this can be useful, particularly when we get into JavaScript. When we get into JavaScript, you'll see how you can sort of store data in the divs and then use JavaScript to dip in there and grab it. It doesn't have to be in a div, it could be anywhere, right? I've used that a few times in PHP and JavaScript stuff. So we'll see that later, but we're going to use it right now just for a temporary thing, and we're going to give it the value fire, okay? In a moment, I'm going to show you why that's there, but first let me show you a function that can be useful. That's what today's all about, is functions. Okay? And if you'll recall last video, if you watched it, which you should have because we didn't finish in class, I told you to watch the last 10 minutes, we talked about pseudo elements. Okay? If you're fuzzy on pseudo elements, you're going to want to go back and rewatch the last 10 minutes of the CSS selectors video. But that aside, here's what it looks like. Let's make, say, a block quote here. Block quote. This is a new tag that you may not know. Okay. Let's style it up here. Block quote using the pseudo element called before. And one of the things, if you recall from the video, is that you have to give it a content. Use the content property. And so, for example, I can say chicken, whatever. Just put whatever I want there. And now what will happen is right before that block quote, the word chicken just shows up. Just tacks it on right there. You can also do it after. And now chicken's at the end there, right? So a really common use case for this is you'll style up the block quote before and after, and you'll actually put a quotation mark. So I have a quote inside of quotes there, single quote inside of quotes. And so now the quote is in quotes, right? That's a really common use case for that, where the customer that you're building the site for gives you a bunch of testimonials or something like that. And rather than editing all of their content and putting quotes in there, right, instead of taking each little testimonial and putting it in there, you just put a little quote like this. Also, you can reverse it so that you can get a double quote by putting a double quote inside of single quotes, and then that'll give you that, right? There's a whole bunch more about that in the video from last time, the advanced selectors video. And check out W3 Schools and the Microsoft Development Network, MDN, for more about the pseudo elements. But I'm showing them to you today because here's a common thing that you can do with this new function here. Now we've seen some functions, right? What are the functions we've seen already? There you go. RGB is a function. HSL is a function. RGBA is a function, right? HSLA is a function. Those are functions, okay? We're going to learn a bunch more today, and one of the functions that we can do is called attribute, okay? What the attribute function does, so let's come down here and we'll do one thing. We'll start with the div, and we will grab as the div before content, before. We want the content to be the attribute function, ATTR, and we actually want it to grab the attribute called data-beavis. Right? And it'll grab the value that's in there, which was fire, if you'll recall. So now when I refresh the page, fire is just going to show up in there, right? In that div. If I had something else in the div, for example, maybe I had a paragraph in there, Beavis likes, and we'll close that. And we'll change this to after. And now when I refresh it, Beavis likes fire. The reason it tacks on at the end there is because I'm applying this after effect to the div itself, right? If I were to apply that to the paragraph, well, just changing this won't do it because there is no data Beavis attribute in the paragraph, right? So what I could do is just put this in here, right? Now it'll be what we look for, right? Beavis likes fire. But you don't have to pick a custom attribute. You can use any old attribute, right? So if I had an anchor tag here, a href, and it equals whatever. It's just going to go to the index page or something like that and go home like that. And then in my anchor tags over here, I can actually say after, and I can say the content will actually equal maybe attribute href, right? So we're just going to tack onto the after home, and then right there next to it, it says index, right? Maybe you want to clean that up and put parentheses around it. So I think if you go like this, that should give us what we need, like so. Now it puts parentheses around it, telling you where it's going to go, right? That could be useful, okay? So there's lots of different things you could do with this. Not a whole lot of use cases right now at our level with CSS. The real thing that I wanted to show you there, introduce you to the data dash, which will become very handy in JavaScript, number one. And then also that you can use CSS to dip into your HTML get stuff, right? We just grab that information there. Now, normally when I add, quote, new stuff to the curriculum here, I wait for it to have browser support, right? So when I first added the grid and Flexbox to this course, it was a couple years back, I did it later than people thought. Well, why don't you teach Flexbox? Well, because the browser support was a little janky back then. Now it's really good. This attribute function, I'm going to show you the browser support on it. And here's a good way to find that. Go to just type in MDN, which stands for Mozilla Developer Network, and then we're going to go type in the function here, attribute, and we'll go to the developer network right here. Scroll all the way to the bottom of whatever thing you're looking up. It could have been any property. We just picked this function here. At the very bottom, browser support. Look, no browser supports it. None. Okay, now you'll notice right here it does have attribute and does show that these browsers support it. These are optional features of the attribute function that not a single browser supports. And it's been about 3 years now since those features existed that still are not supported. So I don't know if they're ever going to be supported. Right now they're not, and if they're never supported, then fine. So I'm not even going to bother explaining to you what those things do because they're not supported anywhere. The one thing that is supported though is what we just looked at. Okay? This, of all the stuff we're going to look at today, it's the only one that has no real decent browser support for its true power. Attributes actually very powerful if it does the stuff that no browser supports, but I can't even prove it to you because if I wrote the code that works and then we ran it in the browser, it wouldn't do anything. It's not supported, right? But it can do some pretty cool stuff. So read the documentation on it. Get prepared for when it does finally get accepted, okay? MDN's a great source for that kind of stuff. Okay, any questions? Let's move on to a new function here. A better function that's more powerful, more supported. Probably a better way to say that. All right, I'm going to clear some of this stuff out of here, and we'll put some divs in. And let's just style up those divs real quick. Oh, nice. That's pretty cool, actually. What happened there? Why is that doing that? Oh, look, I didn't close my divs. Look, that's a really cool effect, though, man. It's starting it like it's a new div. Like it's like there's a div inside of a div. So basically every one of those divs is inside the previous one. And so that's why they're all stepped down. They're stepped down by exactly 20. That's really a cool effect though, man. That's totally cool. Yeah, that's nice. Anyway, that's what I meant to do. That's what I was expecting. That's cool though. And I'll leave that in the video for anybody who cares about that.
Cool.
So we're going to make the body display flex. We just a moment ago talked about this idea that the basics of HTML is tags, attributes, and values, stuff that I've been trying to ingrain into your brain since the first day of class, right? Once we get to CSS, what was the three things I tried to ingrain into your brain? Selectors, properties, and values. Okay, so here we go. On the body, here's a new property you're not aware of. It's called Beavis, and its value sets to red. That is a real property, because I just invented it right now. So the point is you can make up your own properties, okay? Now, it's not quite that clear. This is actually more like a variable, like a placeholder. But the reason this is useful is because of the following. So I have a div here. Let's put some content in it. And now I can say P color is Beavis, so it'll be red. Now that's not quite the correct syntax. We'll get to that in a second. But that's what I've done is I've defined a variable called Beavis, and I've set its value to red. So now the real way to do this is put it inside the function called var. Okay, that's the real way to do it. So now if I go look, all the text turns red. And if I change Beavis to have the value of blue, then all the text turns blue. That can be very useful. Yeah, it's a lot less work. So already I'm sure you've had this happen, where you find a really cool color that you want to use, and you get the hex code, right? And it's, 729F1A or whatever. I don't know if that was the right number of letters there. It should have been 6. And you love it, and it's great, and it's a perfect color. And you use it for your paragraph text, and you use it for your anchor. And then later, like 300 lines down in your CSS, you want to use it for your H1. And you're like, crap, what was that color again? So you got to scroll through your document, find it, and then figure out what the heck it was, and then copy and paste it, right? Well, you don't have to do that anymore. You can use a variable, right? I'm going to move this to the top here so we can see it better. And we're going to talk about where you define these variables in a minute. But rather than calling it Beavis, maybe we'll call it main color. And rather than calling it blue, we'll give me some random letters and numbers here, like shout them out. Okay, so main color. And we're going to change the variable here to be main color. And now we refresh, and it's just red. Let's find a different color. Why don't we go find one online? How about that? So there we go. We have this cyanish color or whatever. And now they all turn that color. But now later, when I'm 1,000 lines deep, and I've got all this other code, and I decide, I want to make my H1s that same color, and I do not remember, that's a hex code. I don't remember what it is. Doesn't matter. I'll just use var, and I remember I called it main color. Now you got to remember the name that you gave it, that you called it main color, but now my H1, which I don't have one yet, so we'll put an H1 there. Howdy, housey, whatever. And there we go. Now it's that nice color, and you don't have to bother going to figure out what it was, right? That can be very useful, okay? Here's the way I use this. Oh, before I show you my use case, let me show you one other issue that we're going to run into. So let's make this something that's a little bit, let's just call it purple, just for the fun of it, okay? Purple, make sure we can see that. That's good. Okay, one other thing that you need to understand about this. Right now, I have declared, this line 5 is me inventing that variable called main color. This means that everything that is a child of the body has access to it. Okay? However, if in the div I decide to declare something else like, alt color or whatever, and I set it to yellow, this paragraph right here, I could use alt color, no problem, because that paragraph is inside the div, right? So if I go here and refresh, those are yellow, very ugly, but they are yellow, okay? But if I have a paragraph, let's say this paragraph, that's outside, hello outside, it does not have access to that yellow variable, okay? Because it's not inside the div where divs have access to everything that I created there on line, whatever line that was, line 17. So anything inside of a div has access to that alt. Now I could use main color on that outer one because this paragraph is still inside of the body, so it still has access to that purple. Right? Does that make sense? So this, if you're new to this stuff, this is what's called variable scope. Okay? It's the scope of the variable. A variable is born in this case on line 5, and it will live in the entirety of the body because it was born inside the body. Okay? Which means if you're a div inside of the body, you have access to it. If you're a paragraph inside of a div inside of a body, as long as you're somewhere in the body, you have access to it. That's why this outside paragraph right here does not have access to this yellow color, because that paragraph is not inside of a div. But that is why it does have access to purple, because it's inside of the body. Dig it?
Can you dig it?
Okay, so questions about that scope thing. Typically, what you'll usually do is just declare all your variables in the HTML so everything can access them. And in fact, there's a pseudo class called root, right? Root means the root of the document, basically, which is just HTML. When you're dealing with JavaScript and you're talking about the document object model, then maybe it means the whole document. Okay, so it's a little fuzzy there. If that's fishy for you, just use HTML and you should be good most of the time. Okay, so here's my use case I was going to tell you about a minute ago. I do this all the time. I'll create a variable called spacing. I'll set it to 20 pixels. And notice the px on there and everything. It's the whole variable. Okay, so I'll use this spacing 20 pixels. And then here, for margin, I will use the variable. So margin spacing. Now, when I refresh this, it's still going to be the same. It's just going to be a 20 pixel margin between everything, right? Let me get rid of that paragraph there. So just a 20 pixel margin between them. The question is, can I use that variable in a style that takes in multiple parameters, like border 2 pixel solid red? Yeah, so I can just very easily say border, and for pixels, I'll make it 20 pixel border. Right there. That's it. So, and then if I could have another variable here. Sorry, I could do that. I could be a variable for, I don't know, call it style. Style is dashed, right? And I could have another variable that's called color or border color or something like that, and it's orange. And then I'll just put that right there and color. I don't have to use variables every time. I can just use it in some places and not others. So that should give me an orange dotted or a dashed line there, right? 20 pixel wide. Okay. So what I'll do though here, we'll go back to that border we just had a second ago, undo all that. So we're back to this spot here, and I'm just putting a 20 pixel margin on everything. Let me refresh that. But you'll see there's a 20 pixel border between each one, right? Okay, I'm going to turn off the width now. So it's taking up the full width, but there is a 20 pixel border on either side. Let's make that a little bit bigger, like 40 pixels. Okay, now everything has a 40 pixel border. However, I could do, in fact, let's make it really big so it's kind of obvious how big it is. So there's a 100 pixel border all around. But what I can do is this. I can do a media query. So what will happen here when I refresh and I start resizing, as I resize it, when I get down to 900, that media query kicks in, and now my spacing is 10. Okay? That's pretty handy, but I mean, I could have just as easily changed. This is only one thing, right? This one thing, spacing, but I could have applied that in hundreds of places, right? And then my media query is super tiny because I'm only changing one little thing here. Rather than changing in my media query going, oh, okay, all the divs, set them to margin 20, and all the paragraphs, set them to margin 20, and all the whatever, set them to padding 20, right? I just put a variable up there at the top. Now I use this because sometimes, let's go back to a more reasonable number here. Occasionally, I'll have something like this, where on the paragraph here, I'll want the padding to be 10 pixels. Well, there's another function called calc, C-A-L-C, as in calculate. And I can do this. I can say calc 20 pixels divided by 2. I can do that. And that'll give it 10 pixels. Let's put a border on it so we can see it. border, 2 pixels, solid blue. So on the margin now, I should have a 10 pixel margin all around that, right? And I do. If I wanted to double that from 20 to 40, I could double it, multiply by 2, and it gets bigger, right? Well, I can get really clever and say, instead of 20, put the variable in there called spacing. And now I'm passing in a parameter into another function that the parameter I'm passing in is a function. So I'm calling a function within a function, totally legit. So this is going to take a variable called spacing, 20 pixels, multiply by 2, because I'm doing a calculation, it's going to make the margins on those paragraphs 40 pixels, like it is right now. And if I want to go back to half of 20 to 10, do it that way, divided by 2. It's a pretty cool use case for that. And this is what's cool about that is your site is now proportionate based on 20 pixels or whatever number of pixels. If you decide that that's not enough space or it's too much space, you change that number and the whole site changes because everything's based on that one variable. Okay? So the question was, what if I reuse that variable name in a different scope, if I'm understanding it correctly, right? So let's start here with the spacing at 50. That means we have these big, huge spaces between the red things there. And then in the div, directly, I reassign it spacing to 200, something crazy. This right here, the paragraph, it's going to use its parent's spacing. So when I refresh, it gets the paragraph. Notice the paragraph there. Also the div, because the div's using its own version of spacing, right? So it just overrode it. So let's not do that on here. We'll just go back to hard coding that number for a minute so we can clarify what just happened there, okay? So remove this, and right now, blue paragraphs, they have spacing divided by 2, which is 25, okay? Well, I've decided to, in the div, set spacing to equal 200 pixels. So now the paragraph's going to have 100, right? It's 200 divided by 2. Refresh it, and you'll see it's a bigger gap there. And so but if I had something that's, let's put something back outside of this div, and we'll say I'm outside. That paragraph, however, will still be 50 divided by 2, right? So if I refresh it, it's not got 100 because it's not inside the div, so it can't inherit its parent's overwriting of the original. Does that all make sense? Right? It's kind of tricky. Okay, good question. All right, there's one other use case for a calc that's kind of fun. There's more. We're going to see some a little bit later, but this one's a cool one. What you can do is, let's go to the divs here, and we'll say that the width, now I could say, like, this is silly, but I could say 900 pixels minus 100 pixels. Okay, that's just going to be 800 pixels, right? I think that's kind of obvious. But you can do it in percentages where I could say 100% minus, I don't know, 50 pixels. That's totally legitimate. So what this will do is it'll make the div 100% of the width of its parent, which is the body, but it'll hack off 50 pixels from that 100%, whatever it is. And so right now that turns out to be kind of where we were already at. Let's change it to a different number. Let's do minus 10 pixels. And you can see now that it's, why is that? What's happening there? That's probably because I got my thing sized too big. There we go. No, we still got a scroll bar. So that means, oh yeah, this margin right here is messing with that. Let's get rid of that margin. Sorry about that. See what I'm talking about, this vertical scroll bar here, or horizontal scroll bar? Now when I refresh it, there we go. So what's happening, that margin was tacking another 20 pixels onto it, and I didn't want that. What's happening here, this is 100% of the width except for that little teeny 10 pixels on the edge there, right? So maybe we want to make that a little bit bigger, 40 pixels. So it just bumps out 40 pixels, but otherwise it's 100% other than that. Well, you can now do the old margin auto trick, margin 10 pixels auto or whatever, And now it'll actually center it on the left and right, and the margin on each side, or the centering on each side, the little edge there is 20 and 20, right? Total of 40. So that's a way you can center stuff. Right, it's pretty clean. All right, questions about that? Okay, let's move on to the fun stuff. This is cool, but there's some really fun stuff I had here. So let's clean up all, I'm gonna kill all this. All my hard work. We got a bunch of boxes here, great. With those boxes, let's put some background stuff on them. So one thing you probably already know about, another function here, for background image, you can use the URL function, right? And you can pass in there URLs. I think that's what I called it. In the background of the image is the metallic image. Now that's a big image, okay? And it's actually just cropping out whatever size the div is to fit it in there, okay? Let me quickly get some extra div styling here. So there's other things that go along here. We could do background size, and there's one called cover. I think that's the one I'm looking for. And it sort of changes it to where it'll fit the height inside the image properly, inside the whatever its container is. It's still, the image is wider than that, but it now forces it to a certain height. Okay, so lots of things you can do with images. However, what we're gonna do is sort of build an image rather than using this URL. And we're gonna create an image. Linear gradient is a new function. And a gradient is just where you blend colors together, right? So I'm going to blend green into yellow. Linear gradient, green, yellow. And now you'll see this nice little gradient, right? Pretty cool. Well, you can get way fancier with this. Now, I'm going to warn you right now, what I have right here on my desk is a stack of papers. This is just some of the documentation for gradients, okay? There's a ton of documentation on it. These are the most complex functions in CSS by far, okay? These can take in multiple parameters, basically an infinite number of parameters. So, simple example, if I want to add another color, I can just do it, and now it's gradient 3 different colors, right? It blends from green to yellow to pink. I can put as many colors as I want. I can use any method of colors. I can use hex code, I can use RGB, I can use the names, I can use variables, whatever I want. Yes, RGB and RGBA as well, all of those, yep. HSL, HSLA, every one of those, yep. You can put anything you want there as a color. There's also, however, besides the color parameters, the very first parameter that you can pass in if you choose to is a direction. So I want to go to the left. So right now, the default, it starts at the top, works its way from top to bottom, but I just changed it to go to the left. And so now it's going to go from the right, starting green, working its way to the left. I could also say to the left bottom, like the bottom left corner, right? And it's going to go that way, diagonally. It's a simple little change like that, right? You can also say bottom left or left bottom. The order there doesn't matter. Top right, top left, to the bottom, to the top, or whatever. All those work. Not the word the, but just two bottom, two top, two right, two left. But wait, there's more.
But I'm not done yet.
There's a lot more. Okay, not even close to scratching the surface here. Let's do a fourth color. Let's say black. And we get that, and let's go back to just going to the right this time. So we go from left to right here. It goes from green to yellow to pink to black. I know that's kind of ugly, right? But that's all right. What I can do is say, I want green to go from 0% to 25%. Notice there's no commas there. It's just sort of attached onto the green there. So that will force 25%. You can see kind of a hard line there. Can you see that? That forces 25% to be green, and then at 25% start transitioning to the next color. Well, what if I said on the next color, yellow, 25% to 50%, I want it to be forced to be yellow. You'll see there'll be like a hard line there between the green and the yellow, because we told it 0 to 25% must be green. Because we told it green goes from 0 to 25, and then yellow goes from 25 to 50, you have a hard stop right there in the middle, and you can see it right here. There's a hard stop right there where it's the yellow ends there, and now it's starting to blend into pink. Okay? That makes sense? And there's a hard stop right there on the green where it's normally you would start blending right there, but we told yellow that it has to fill that spot. Okay? So if we keep going here, let's take pink and tell it to go from 50% to 75%. You're going to see now that's a hard pink line. And let's take the final color, black. Go from 75 to 100. Now you just get stripes. All right, let's change that black to a different color so that you can see it over the border. Let's go with, we have orange already? We don't. So now it's just stripes, okay? And of course you can change the position to go to the right top or whatever. Now you get this cool effect.
That was cool.
Now, the other thing to note, and again, please check the documentation. Go to MDN, just type in the word MDN, CSS Gradients. Just Google that and go, all right? One thing to notice here is that green going from 0 to 25, well, since green's the first color, saying 0 to 25 is redundant. It implies that, so you don't have to put the 0 there. And since orange is the last color, it assumes go to the end. So that's going to be identical. It doesn't change anything when I refreshed it, okay? A lot of cool things you can do here. So questions on that. So that's linear gradients. Now, instead of linear gradient, we can do a radial gradient. And you get, let me change these parameters. That top right thing is not a thing in radial. There we go. By the way, I meant to do that in the second one, so let's go back to where we were with linear. That's the whole reason I did this. We put this down here, and now we have this. Now this is like a target looking thing because we have those hard stops with the percentages. Of course, if you turn that off and you don't have the percentages there, and it's just the colors, then it'll be more of the blur kind of effect that you're used to. Like that, right? Radial blur. Now again, look up the documentation because there are parameters you can pass in to shift where the center is, right? Instead of having the center in the center, you can make that center spot down at the bottom or at the top or something like that, okay? You can also tell it what shape it's going to be. So right now it's a circle, but I can also do ellipse. And now you get, well, because we have, yeah, let me make it a rectangle shape here. So we'll do like 500. And you get an ellipse shape there. If I go back to circle, you get the circle, right? You couldn't tell because we had a perfect square. But now you get that sort of blur effect with a circle or with an ellipse. Okay, there are other parameters. Look them up, check them out. There's lots of them, okay? You can also do this. Let's go to the third one here. Get rid of the ellipse here. And we will do conic gradient. Like a cone. Think of that as like a top view of a cone, right? It starts at green, it's going like in a clockwise circle there. And you can control the direction. You control where the center is. All these things you have control over. But you got to look at the documentation. There's so many of them. So many. Okay, let's look at this next one here. So we will put this in here. We'll go with this one I think is good. And let's put the word repeating right here. I'm going to have to tweak some of the settings here. And so what we're going to do here, get rid of this top right and we'll go to the right. And let's just pick two colors. We'll go green, yellow, and that's it. Let's start there. So I want to go green 0 to 25, yellow 25 to 50, then green again 50 to 75%. And when I run this, we get a striped effect. Now notice there's 2 greens and 2 yellows. But in my code here, there's only 1 yellow. Right? Let's change this to smaller numbers. We'll say like 10%. And it just keeps striping, right? Keeps repeating. And of course, if we want to do to right bottom, we'll get like a little cool diagonal looking thing, striped diagonal. Let's put these back to squares here. That's kind of cool looking pattern right there. Now, going back to what we learned about variables a minute ago, this is kind of fun. In our HTML, which I don't have that yet, so we'll just come up here and we'll set a variable called color1 and it's red. By the way, when you make the variables, you got to put the double dashes there. That's required, okay? Just in case I didn't say that earlier. And white. And now down here in my repeat, notice I can also do repeating conic, repeating radial, right? I'm doing, in this case, repeating linear. We're going to change that color to var color 1, and that green one there is also, again, and this one will be color 2. Now it's going to be red and white because those are the two colors that I made. But what's cool, I just changed it up here, green and black or whatever, and now it changes the whole thing. So that's a use case, a small one, but a use case for using variables. Again, I'm begging you, read the documentation. There's so many cool things that you can do that we haven't even touched on, okay? If we have time at the end, I'll show you some samples that I've already got like the code written up, and we'll look at it and kind of talk about what you can do with it. But we got to move on to some other fun stuff, okay? So any questions about the variable function, about the calc function, or the gradient stuff? In the calc function, I'm just going to put it here, not use it for anything useful. This isn't even proper syntax because I have to apply it to a property. But if I had 10 pixels minus 5 pixels, if I don't have that space there, that will be a problem. You need to have that space there on both sides of that. Good? Okay. One other thing I want to show you about gradients, and then we'll move on to a new topic here, and that is Css Gradients Dot Io. I've linked to this in the lecture notes already. And all this is a page where you can actually set the colors up. So I can drag this where I want, and I can change this, and who knows what all these things are changing exactly. You have to study this page a little bit. And I want this style of gradient, and I want it to be over here, or whatever, radial, then click copy, and there's your code, right? Now, I could have just showed you that, but I want you to know how it works, right? And to understand it a little bit. And so you can see how it's being used. Okay, so this is a good tool though. Just like we gave you that thing the other day for changing the shape of a div. There's lots of cool tools out there like that, but you need to understand how they're working. Okay, next up. This is really cool. Over here, I'll put a head on H1, I should say. Well, you can put a background image on your H1, background image, and the background image is going to be URL, this metallic image again. All right, so now there's a background image on the H1. Notice it's repeating, right? You can change that with things like background repeat is no repeat. It's a setting you can use. And so now it won't repeat, but I want it to stretch across. So I believe that background size cover might be the one that'll work. Yeah, that works. Sort of stretches it across. That's pretty cool. Let's center that text real quick. What I can do is you can actually clip that image. You can clip it with a couple of different things, but one of the ones that I care about is clipping it to be the exact dimensions and size as the font text, right? So you can do background clip, text. You can also do background clip content. You can do background clip other things. We're going to go with text. Okay, when I refresh it, nothing will happen yet because this is a new idea for you guys probably. When a new property is built or created in the CSS world, not all browsers have built in the support for it yet. And so until there's a consensus that officially this is going to be declared a new property where all the browsers are on board, that we're going to use it, you have to say specifically a specific syntax for each browser. So in other words, if I were using a Mozilla browser, I'd have to say Moz dash background clip. If I'm using Chrome or other WebKit based browsers, it's WebKit background clip. Eventually, someday, it'll just be background clip will work on every browser. But for now, you have to use browser extensions for each browser. That's about all I'm going to teach you about browser extensions. If you want to learn more, W3 Schools, MDN, okay? But they're called browser extensions. So I happen to be in a WebKit browser. I can leave all three there, and just when we get to the right browser, it'll figure it out, okay? But the one that's going to work for us happens to be WebKit. So now when I refresh, the image appears to have gone away, but it did not. It is actually now exactly the shape of the M and the E and the T and so forth. It's just the text is in front of it. So make the text transparent. And poof, you get this, right? That's pretty cool. And that's a nice shot of their faces inside of there. Each one of their faces is perfectly in a nice letter where you can kind of see them. That's pretty cool. But you can also do this with a gradient, okay? Because remember, a gradient is actually a background image. It's not a color, it's an image, right? So right here, instead of the URL for Metallica, we could put a linear gradient, and we could just go from black to red or something like that, and you'll get this effect, okay? You could do the linear gradient repeat thing where you get a nice little stripy weird looking thing, or we can go at a diagonal to the left bottom, and we get that kind of effect where it gets darker as it progresses. So there's lots of different things you can do with that. The key that makes this work though is the background clipping right here, okay? Next week when we look at animation, you're going to see how to make that sort of appear to be shimmering. Right, we'll use animation to sort of move that gradient on the image so it'll look like your font or your text is sort of shimmering and moving. It's pretty cool. We'll look at that next week. Okay, any questions so far? We got one last thing that I want to show you and then we'll be done. We good? All right. This is the one I told you about that I've already built. And we're going to apply that style right here. It's called Gradient. Style sheet already made. And we'll put some divs in here. Okay, what I want to do is if we go to that style sheet that I just told you I built, I'll give you a copy of this if you guys want it. It's actually from the documentation. Notice it has background 4 times. Background's a shortcut for, in this case, we're using background image, but it's the same thing. Because of the way the cascade works, the only one that's actually going to work is the bottom one, right? Follow? Okay, so I'm going to leave them there for a minute, then we'll delete them as we go along. But let's just quickly take a look here. If I refresh this page, and this is not meant to teach you how these work, it's just to show you some of the possibilities, okay? So, and let me put some text around these things real quick. So this now shows you which one we're looking at, right? So that's done with a linear gradient, right? It's pretty cool. This is done with conic, and that's done with radial, and that's done with a repeat on, don't remember what we're repeating, if it's radial or they're all repeat linear. So all those are repeat linear. Okay, let's delete the bottom one. And notice something here. I'm applying the background image. There's one linear gradient, comma, or here's the whole linear gradient, and then I got a new one. So there's 2 linear gradients, and then a third one, just separated by commas. Totally legit, okay? We're gonna delete those though. Delete that one, delete that one. And again, the cascade will just take the bottom one in the list here. And now we get this. That radial one's pretty cool. I like that one a lot. Okay, and again, let's just delete the bottom ones here. And there's only one left on the repeat, but totally different looking effects here just by playing around with the different settings. This is why I want you to look at the documentation, all right? Last one here we'll do, and we'll just leave that one as it is. And you get this effect. Pretty cool. Let me undo all those deletes so I can save this file and let you guys have it so you can play around with it. Okay, good. So that was not meant to teach you anything. It was just meant to show you some potential, some possibilities. Okay? I'm going to show you one last thing and then we're done. This is bringing it all together here. Okay? Let's say we have a paragraph. All right, let's now put in here for the P warning, we're going to do the color of it. We'll do the background color, let's say. Background color is going to be HSL, sorry. And we'll do 360. And we'll do 100% saturation and 50% here. And then we'll do, for the regular, we'll do 180. Okay? So now if I refresh this, let's put some padding and stuff on that real quick. Okay, that other one's hidden down there, but not the best color for the font, but we have this warning message and we have this regular message. Now, notice I use HSL, sorry, because I can pick colors that are on the opposite side of the color wheel, right? I made them 180 degrees apart on purpose, because what I can do is this, make a variable called hue, and we'll set it to 360, and now right here we're going to use a variable called var 360, or sorry, hue. Nothing will change, right? When I refresh it, it's just picking, now it's using the variable though. Then down here what I can do is calculate var hue minus 180. So now that's going to go to the opposite end of the color wheel, which will, again, nothing changed. However, now if I want, I can change the hue to say 200. And now both the colors will change to be always complementary across the color wheel from each other, right? So let's do 110 or something. And now we get these. Those are on the color wheel, they're across from each other, right? Remember there was the triad thing that you could do, right? Where you could do perfectly even split of 3. So let's do the next one here, and this will be the info. And instead of doing minus 180, we'll do minus 120 and minus 240. That will give me the triad, right? If you do the math, 360 minus 120 is a third of the way around. 360 minus 240 is 2/3 away. So now, refresh it, and those are split on the triad on the color wheel. So if I change this to, I don't know, 75, that's a triad pattern there. Dig it? Okay? And if you don't know exactly what I'm saying with the triad and everything, go back and watch the color video. Right? So this is really cool because now I can change the theme of my entire site, right? I can do it with the hue here and I can make a pattern like we just did, or maybe I just have a main color that I use for all the text and I have a sort of backup color that I use for borders or whatever, and I have another color that I use for just heading ones. And I have all those variables right here. And then we decide to change the style, the color palette or something. I just change those 3 variables and the whole site's done. Okay, lots of power here. Yeah, how are we feeling?